Good afternoon, fellow Toastmasters. Please raise your hands if you felt angry or frustrated due to failed expectations.
Oh, many times.
Through a great personal loss, I've learned certain lessons to deal with failed expectations. And that's what my speech E&F is going to talk about. A couple of years ago, my cousin committed suicide. She was about 30 years old. She was born 100 days before me. When I heard the news, it was extremely shocking because this wasn't something which I'd expected from her. As I started discovering and piecing together the reasons of why she committed suicide, there was a grand narrative which emerged. The grand narrative was of failed expectations. She was born into a patriarchal family. As a woman, she was growing up and she expected to be treated as equal in a family. My uncle, a good man, had a patriarchal mindset. He did try during his life to correct that behavior, but during clashes and during fundamental differences, the patriarchal mindset would get the better of him and he wouldn't give her the respect she wanted. That was the first failed expectation she had while she was growing up. She saw her parents' relationship. They had a seesaw relationship. They would be madly in love at times and then they would have violent fights. So the expectation she set for herself was to have a respectful marriage when she grew up. As she grew older, she met this boy at office who seemed to be different from the men she knew in her life. He seemed to respect her for being equal. He gave her the love and the respect she needed. So she dreamt of constructing her life again, of a beautiful life. She got married and she shifted to the boy's family. What was not known to her was the boy's parents had reservations about the marriage. The boy stood for his decisions and decided to get married to her. So once my cousin moved to his house, the boy's parents decided to show their anger in the form of silence. And silence is extremely powerful. They wouldn't talk to her, they wouldn't eat any food made by her. She decided to give it some time. Days turned to weeks, weeks turns to months, months turned to years. And after 4 long years, the hope and the expectation she had built of a beautiful life had weighed her down. She was into deep depression and her partner decided to move out of his parents' house. She had one last expectation from him, which was the most difficult one. She expected him to cut off ties with his parents for the way they treated her. And that was an expectation which was difficult to fulfill. This led them to have violent fights on a regular basis. And one fateful night, when she finished her rant and she went and locked herself up in the room, she saw an image of her in the mirror and she realized she was a mirror image of the parents who kept fighting through her growing up years. She had become somebody who she didn't want to become. It was the burden of failed expectations that she couldn't live with and she decided to commit suicide. Her suicide led me to a lot of introspection, a lot of questions. It was something which was personal. It was something which we all had to learn to deal with. As I started understanding successful relationships, some people seem to be content with whatever they have. And some of us have a problem coping up with the various challenges, coping up with expectations. When I read more about it, spoke to people, there was one common thread which emerged through all of this, and that is the E&F Index. So the E Index is called Embrace Imperfection. So if we think about our existence, we don't get to choose our parents. They don't get to choose us. We don't get to choose our siblings. We don't get to choose, in some cases we get to choose our spouses, some cases we don't. We don't get to choose our bosses, our co-workers. But then we all expect a perfect life, a perfect relationship with our parents, with our siblings, a perfect career, a perfect boss. What we have to learn to realize is each of us are imperfect. So is everybody else. In an imperfect world, in an imperfect environment, we are expecting perfection. We have to learn to embrace the imperfections in us and in everybody else and give them the opportunity to move towards perfection. Everybody wants to move towards perfection, but the imperfect circumstances help them or influence their decisions, which are irrational, which are emotionally driven. But embracing imperfection is the first step for us to deal with failed expectations. So what do we do once we embrace imperfection? So once we embrace imperfection is to exercise the F index, which is forgive. So when we have made mistakes, we expect our near and dear ones to forgive us. So once we have embraced the imperfection in us and everybody else, if they've made a decision which could impact us personally, professionally, the only thing we can do is to forgive them. Forgive them for that imperfection, put our hand around them and tell them it's okay. Even if that affects us, the best thing which we can do is to forgive them, because that will give them an opportunity to correct, to move towards the perfection they want. It will give us an opportunity to embrace failed expectations. Because with failed expectations, if we don't learn to embrace imperfection and forgive, it will only lead us to crash down, and it will lead us to seem to be in a hopeless life. So if my cousin had practiced the E&F Index, she would have probably lived to see the light of the day. So I urge you all Toastmasters to practice the E&F Index, and I hope that can titillate us for life. Over to Timothy.